Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Vaskatya Desatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Panchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvayevyacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, as I believe everybody is acutely aware of the recent departure of His Holiness Srila Bhakti True Maharaj, and it's something that it's practically speaking, I don't know one person who hasn't been affected by his departure on one level or another. His godbrothers, his god sisters, his disciples, aspiring disciples, his followers. Maharaj was a unique personality in ISKCON in that he actually embodied many of the good qualities of a Vaishnava. And he did it not in an artificial way, but that he was a genuinely, for example, humble soul. The other day I was speaking to devotees in Columbus, and one of his disciples told a story how at one point Maharaj had called up him and his wife, and apologized to them over a situation whereby many of the disciples, including them, had enthusiastically come together to financially support a project that, had it been successful, would have been quite beneficial by and large for the society and for the different projects, but it didn't turn out that way. It turned out to be kind of a disaster, actually. And Maharaj personally apologized to the disciples who had participated with their enthusiasm and their desire to help, and at the same time it didn't work out. So there was various angles of loss. Maharaj took it upon himself to accept the full blame, if you want, although there's no blame, but still, because he had encouraged, the disciples had followed. So he genuinely apologized to each and every one of them. And I found that was a really perfect example of his humility, that he was under no obligation to say anything, really, but he did. And it just further endured him to his disciples. And for me, upon hearing that, he further was endeared to my heart. There were so many instances when he stepped outside of his, what we like to term nowadays, comfort zone, to assist and help not just his disciples, but devotees, godbrothers, god sisters, and others who were participating in Srila Prabhupada's branch of Lord Chaitanya's movement. So it is a quality, this humility, that can be remembered and emulated. At the same time, with all humility, he could also stand up and be a very strong leader. And I saw this in action a few years ago, where there was a very contentious issue over the temple in Brooklyn, the New York temple with Radha Govinda. It had literally been hijacked and was out of ISKCON. And Maharaj was the chairperson that year for the entire GBC. And along with Praghosh and Sesha, who are the co-chairs, he just said something has to be done. You know, I mean, this situation had been going on and on. Maharaj was the first chairperson to stand up for the situation and say something has to be done. And he stood up very bravely, even at risk of great adversity. So with all humility, just like Arjuna, stand up and fight, O Arjuna, that was very humble. You know, you can't say that Arjuna wasn't humble as he was pulling his bow and killing people. It was humility because he was following the instructions of Krishna. And in the same way, Bhakti Maharaj was defending ISKCON very strongly. And it was a very humble way, a very humble demonstration on how humility doesn't just mean to be beaten down or keeping your mouth shut. When you use your mouth in the right way for Krishna's purpose and Krishna's service, that's humility. So seeing that both sides of him, where he could apologize to a disciple because something didn't work out and he felt responsible, and standing up and fighting on behalf of Prabhupada's ISKCON, both were signs of his very deep humility. And one of my god sisters who holds a very strong position in ISKCON, she was saying, I don't know what I'm going to do now, because whenever I needed any help, he was the person who always helped things keep rolling, you know, and no one else did that. No one else would come forward. So now I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to perform my service. So he was endeared to everyone, and just we learn in the Bhagavatam that when a great soul departs, they leave aside on the shore all the knowledge, all the means, all the information for those who follow to be able to also depart successfully. And certainly one of the hallmarks of Srila Bhakti True was how well he trained his disciples in Vaishnava etiquette and in serving one another, not just serving disciples, but serving Prabhupada disciples, serving other gurus' disciples, serving persons who are just coming. This mood of unalloyed service to the mission included serving all persons. So that was another aspect of his wonderful character. And hopefully all of that training and all the training that he left and gave to his disciples and to others who experienced this by associating with them, hopefully now it will kick in and people will be able to function at a very high level due to their good fortune of having his instructions and being instructed in practical matters, in terms of deep spiritual matters, and all levels of Krishna consciousness. So, Srila Bhakti True Maharaj Ki Jai. So, I'm just going to kind of a little randomly just go over a few of the points of the topic which I was speaking about, family matters in Krishna consciousness. And then there's a list of questions that came, and I will be addressing some of them because time is not going to allow all of them. So again, the information that I was imparting came from two sources mainly. Matsyavatar Prabhu from Italy, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada and also an initiating guru, as well as Srila Prabhupada's teachings himself. And Matsyavatar himself is a successful grihastra. So it's always good to hear from success stories, although sometimes even a story that seems like a disaster can be turned into a success story when one learns the lesson well. So family life or the Grihastha ashram, it holds universal interest, Not everyone will get married. Some will not. Not everyone who's married is going to have children. Some will not. But even for those who don't get married, are those who have surpassed this stage of life, maybe by old age, etc., can benefit by understanding the basic dynamics and values of family life according to the Vedic Vaishnava civilization. And knowledge of the fundamentals of the, I'm sorry, I just realized something. Am I speaking too fast? Hi, Krishna?
No, it's okay.
So there's simultaneous translations going on. As soon as I'm speaking too fast, just say something to me, okay? Okay. So knowledge of the fundamentals of the Grihastha ashram, it's an integral part of spiritual realization. And we could say it's an integral part of human civilization even, because it is a social organization. Marriage is a social organization pertaining to and related to spiritual realization. So when renunciates will touch base and instruct those who are engaged in family life, even renunciates will instruct those in family life. So directly, indirectly, everyone has a vested interest in family life. And the ashram is fundamental. It's hard to avoid even for those who desire commitment to brahmacharya. So you may not personally get married, but you're certainly going to be in contact with those who do and have. And, so one of the big issues in family matters pertains to dealing with sex life, specifically illicit sex. So in ISKCON, we're taught to follow 4 regulative principles, among which avoiding illicit sex is generally the most crucial and quite often the most difficult. And sometimes there's situations in a marriage where one member of the couple doesn't agree with or is unable to practice sexual restraint, and this inevitably leads to ultimately a breakup in the marriage. And even if they don't break up, there is just such a uncomfortable situation between the two. So it's a burning issue. You can say this is a burning issue, and it requires honest clarification individually and mutually. And Matsyavatara's understanding of Srila Prabhupada's teachings is very, what I would say, spot on. He distinguishes between 2 categories of illicit sex. The first is premarital, in other words, sex outside of marriage. And then in marriage, sometimes there may be some situations where there will be more sexual activity than is generally recommended, but within the marriage. So of the 2, the second is preferable. That is within a marriage, even if there is some transgressions of the strict classification. Either way, they're both classified as quote-unquote illicit sex, but there's no comparison between the consequences of sex outside of marriage and illicit sex within a religiously united couple. So the term illicit sex is used to point out that for both men and women, their proper function is procreation. So following Prabhupada and his teachings, the same is there for those who are seeking spiritual realization and aspire to develop pure love of God. So they should desire to strictly follow the regulative principles and therefore make it a principle within their marriage to not engage in illicit sexual activities. But on the other hand, we have seen over 50 years plus, there has been pain and suffering caused by uncritical, uncompromising, or shall we say, unrealistic applications of what it means of illicit sex. You know, people live in different levels of consciousness. It's really rare that two people are on the same level at the same time all the time. So sometimes in marriage, even friendship, one person is making rapid advancement, and then the other person may not be. Or there may be times when one is up and the other is down, and then it switches, you know. So Nazi Avatar feels, you know, he strongly considers that one should strongly follow the regulative principles as taken up by one's vows if initiated. But still, if cases where serious turmoil in a family and in a marriage that can lead to abuse, betrayal, breaking up, or divorce, then one needs to be a little introspective and retrospective to how to properly apply the principle. So he's not, you know, he's not suggesting one should abandon the principle of purity, but at the same time, it should be understood that people can be cured through constant love and affection. And if between the husband and wife there's real sincerity and friendship, in some measure there will also be real love and affection. So when there's willingness to overcome one's limitations, careful concessions can be excused, avoiding a bigger, serious, and often irreparable havoc. So, and he talks about repression and sublimation, that a lot of times, especially nowadays, people are totally into psychological type of maneuverings, and they try to insert that into religious principles, in our case, Krishna consciousness principles. And they will say that, well, you know, if you repress your sexual instincts, then, you know, you're going to become psychologically damaged, etc., etc. But there's a repression without just trying to sublimate. In other words, we're trying to convert our raw base, our raw nature, our raw instincts, and sublimate them into Krishna conscious activities, which means increasing one's sadhana and connection to Guru and Krishna. And even then, someone may so-called fall down for a moment, or, you know, within the marriage. But this shouldn't be taken either seriously, but neither should it be taken, oh, it doesn't matter, and, you know, make repetition. The scriptures explain that only a few people in this day and age are so elevated they can immediately and completely abstain from this, you know, sexual activity, that most people in general need some gradual distancing, and protected by the institution of marriage and regulated by the four principles, the necessary groundwork for a disciplined life in pursuit of spiritual realization. And this is what our marriage is about, that two people coming together to gradually purify themselves and engaging in devotional service, through engaging in devotional service. So both repression and indiscriminate indulgence of instincts mentioned can produce neurosis or personality disorders. But our literature, the Vaishnava literature, explains that these psychophysical energies, they're indispensable for the journey towards transcendence. So they shouldn't be negated, they shouldn't be repressed, nor should they be indiscriminately dispersed. They should be used beneficially, which means according to, you know, spiritual discipline. In other words, they should be sublimated by engaging in devotional service. And Prabhupada wrote in a letter to Hayagriva Prabhu, who was one of the co-founders of New Vrindavan, and he said that deity worship and proper spiritual association are the best means to overcome the problems of Mr. Lust. So Mr. Lust is not only limited to men. Women, believe it or not, can be also having the same problem. In fact, we do, otherwise we wouldn't be here in material bodies in the material world. So, so we said for Harinam Japa, Nama Sankirtan, deity worship, and proper spiritual association. These are the best means. So again, Harinam Japa, Nama Sankirtan, deity worship, and proper association. And out of those, if you have proper association, the rest will be very easy to follow. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's taught that whoever, in the second and third chapter, it's taught whoever represses certain impulses but keeps cultivating attachment for sense objects in the mind, persisting in their contemplation and internally longing for them, will not be successful on the yoga path. There's one who restrains the senses of actions, but whose mind dwells on sense object, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So that's Bhagavad Gita 3:6. And I had a young woman in my ashram during the years in Columbus, when there was just a ladies' ashram temple. It was a fully running temple, deity worship, Sankirtan, book distribution, everything was going on. And one day, one of the young women on a traveling party called me, and she confessed to me that she'd had a fall down with an old boyfriend that she met out on Sankirtan. And I asked her, well, how do you think that happened? You know, I mean, I was wondering, how does she think? She told me frankly, she said, well, I was always thinking about it. But I thought, oh, it's okay to think about it as long as I don't do it. But the reality is, when you contemplate sense gratification, when you cultivate attachment for the sense objects in the mind, and then the next thing is you'll be falling down because that's where you've been propelling yourself. So she even admitted, even she would sometimes have her hand in the bead bag, but she'd be thinking of this other situation. So we have to be very careful. It is said in Kali Yuga, there's no fault assigned to thinking, mental activities. But if you cultivate those thoughts, and you persist in holding those thoughts, then you can expect a reaction. Because while contemplating the objects of senses, then a person develops attachment for them. And then from this attachment, lust develops. And then from this frustrated lust, anger arises. So then the next step, from anger, complete delusion arises. And then from delusion, bewilderment of memory. And when the memory is bewildered, what's the next step? Intelligence is lost. And then, for sure, when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. This is Gita 2:62 and 63. We keep these are very good lessons, very good reminders that we should never minimize. And regarding sensitive issues, specifically connected with life in the Grihastha ashram, we've observed symptoms and damage caused by hasty decisions with couples who have a rigid mentality. We can be rigid with ourselves, but not with others, as something Prabhupada used to say to us. Many, with a general comment, not specifically for marriage, but it applies that personally we can be strict with ourselves, but we have to be a little gentle with others. And many marriages have definitely failed because the person experiencing the difficulty controlling the senses meets with a rigid spouse or partner. So then what often happens, unfortunately, then they look outside the marriage for some kind of satisfaction, maybe some affair, online porno, intoxication, masturbation, all these things. And it produces a very hellish, unhealthy condition for all concerned. So real affection means to come forward and meet the needs of others. And every real need in the family really has to be given serious consideration. And if a person thinks that he or she cannot or should not ever concede anything, absolutely nothing, this type of person with that type of mentality really shouldn't even get married. Because if they get married throughout matrimonial life, they will be bitterly reminded of this point, because marriage is definitely a give and take situation. And a couple means two persons who promise to help each other for the rest of their lives together. And if one person is in need and the other doesn't help, there's no way this refusal can be beneficial for one's spiritual advancement. So then how can you say this is being done in the name of devotion for Krishna? And for sure, okay, there's going to be a little embarrassment, a little enthusiasm or whatever else. But above all, the principle, something has to be done to help the person and the marriage. And in saying this, I'm not condoning, neither is Matsya Avatar, condoning abuse or force. That I want to underscore. So real affection, ultimately, in real affection, real spiritual affection, there is no need for, gross sex or physical contact. But this affection is the achievement of bhakti. It's obtained after long practice. It's not the starting point, So in the beginning, couples may have to overcome the problem, but to rise above it, the effort must be equipped with enough capacity and experience and enough cultural and spiritual maturity in Krishna consciousness. And very strongly endorsed. We have like Grihastha Vision team, they very strongly endorse this. Matsya Avatar strongly endorses that prior to a marriage, people should get to know each other very well. This doesn't mean moving in together, by the way, or sleeping together. Get to know each other very well by thoroughly inquiring about the other person's choices and priorities in life. And in this regards, premarital guidance, it's really a must from a trusted, experienced family counselor. And both should become deeply aware of the responsibility, the obligation, and the burdens that are part of marriage, as well as the joy that can come from overcoming these different burdens and fulfilling the obligations and responsibilities. And then I read a letter from Prabhupada to me. I'll read that again because I think it's a very deep core instruction. So he asked, I had written to him, and you'll see what I asked by his answer. You have asked if I found it difficult to carry on devotional service while in my grihastha life, my household life. And yes, I did. Now, the thing was, I was experiencing difficulty on the mundane level that we had gone to England. I had a little baby, like 6 weeks old. We didn't have a place to live, so we were constantly going from one place to the other. And in the meantime, there was so much service to be done. We were trying to start a temple, and it was pretty and we had no money. We weren't allowed to work there, so quite difficult. So that was why I found it difficult. And what to speak of trying to chant 16 rounds, it's really difficult. So Prabhupada, I didn't specify what was difficult. I just asked him, well, was it difficult for you, to practice devotional service in household life? And he said, yes, I did. And then he explained, in my household life, I was strictly following the regulative principles, but my wife was reluctant to assist me properly. Therefore, ultimately, I was obliged to give up their company. And then he said, you should take care of Lord Jagannath as far as possible after doing your household duties. Because I had the first little deities of Jagannath that I'd found. They were with me. So add that to taking care of everything. So he in other words, deity worship was not a number one on the list of household service duties. He said, take care of them after doing your household duties. But, and here's the real instruction, but you should be strict only in completing the 16 rounds of chanting. That will save you from all discrepancies. Strict only in chanting 16 rounds will save you from all discrepancies. As a householder, even if there are some flaws in following the rules and regulations, it doesn't matter. You should try your best. Try your best. And with Krishna's help, and then he says, Krishna will help you. If you keep your heart in that attitude that you want to become a pure and sincere devotee, you must be a sincere devotee. And he repeats, and Krishna will help you. You have to keep your heart in that way. That is your business. So a very clear household life is not ashram, brahmachari, brahmachari, ashram life. There's so many things to be considered, but the number one consideration, strict consideration, is 16 rounds. And, we should try to be honest and serious with ourselves, first of all, and have a balanced vision and not accept a vow of celibacy at a young age without showing tangible signs of maturity and dominion over the senses. And sometimes people find that, they may have some little fall down within the marriage, and then they're feeling guilty. But actually, guilt, when properly accepted, it assists you in rectifying yourself. If you do something that's not spiritually benefiting, and you don't feel some guilt, what is that? Then you just keep on doing that, So, and then some people become overcome by guilt, which almost becomes another form of sense gratification. They become the guilty victim, but that's not helpful. This little bit of guilt that Krishna gives us to help us realize, I'm not doing the right thing, and help us to rectify. And there's this wonderful verse in the Bhagavatam 11, 20, 27, 28, that having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material sense gratification activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. For even though he is sometimes engaged in sense gratification, my devotee knows that all sense gratification ultimately leads to a miserable result, and therefore repents such activities. So Krishna is telling us that there will be instances when a devotee becomes overwhelmed and succumbs to sense gratification, but that doesn't mean just throw out the japa bag. No, it means, okay, you feel a little sorry, you feel, you understand sense gratification is not a part of a healthy spiritual life unless it's dovetailed to Krishna. So sense gratification, when it occurs, we shouldn't just feel like discouraged. Krishna says, remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. And even though sometimes engaged, not all the time, sometimes in sense gratification, my devotee knows, we know sense gratification leads to a miserable result. And therefore we repent these activities. And so that's Krishna, Krishna's words of instruction and assurance from the Bhagavatam. So regarding sensitive issues, specifically connected to the Grihastha ashram, we want to avoid, a rigid mentality. We want to avoid causing misery to our husband or wife by being so rigid that we push them away, That produces a very unhealthy, hellish condition. And we want to to strive to develop pure spiritual affection through spiritual realization, friendship, where sex becomes needless. But that takes some work, and it takes commitment between the two partners. So there's two categories: those who marry to further enjoy their material life, and those who unite for reciprocal help in self-realization. So as devotees, we are exclusively dealing with the second category. The first category, where they come together for material life, sense gratification, they have the sexologists, the psychologists, and other researchers to take care of. We are only concerned with maintaining ourselves within the focus as marriage as an instrument for spiritual realization. So anyways, a few of the overviews, and so then I'll move on to the questions that came. Move this down. Just a second, I'll get this out of my way. Okay. So, another thing is, I'll say that in part of the questions. So, the first question actually doesn't have anything to do with the topic, but indirectly it does. They're asking about my daughter, Saraswati. So indirectly it has something to do with the topic, because family, offspring, etc. Anyway, please tell us a little about the fate of your daughter Saraswati. Person writes, I remember the lecture of His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami, where he says, where is little Saraswati? This is a very awesome lecture. It was given in Mayapur. Sati, can you remember the year when he gave that lecture?
No, sorry, not really.
Anyways, it was centered on devotee care. That was the topic, really. And how, sometimes devotees just let people go out the door without chasing them, without grabbing them. Hey, wait a minute. I remember one time when I was a traveling Sankirtan devotee in Europe. Actually, at this point, it was England. And I came back to the manor for a brief, for a couple of days, and I didn't see one of my god sisters. Oh, where is this person? And they said, oh, really often. Oh, she left. We used to use that word, bloop. She's blooping. She decided to bloop. She just went to the train station. What? Nobody stopped her? Well, she wanted to go. So I jumped in. I had a car at the time that we used for Sankirtan. So I just jumped in my car and I just drove as fast as I could to the train station. And I heard the train coming in the distance. And I remember jumping out of the car, and you had to climb the stairs and go over the platform and down. And then I saw her, and I'm running down the steps to the platform. Now I can even see the train, and I'm calling her name. And she looked at me with great surprise. And I just grabbed her and I said, no, you can't go. Whatever it is, it can't be that bad. And the train came, the door opened, and the door shut and went on. And she came with me back to the manor. And she's still in Krishna consciousness to this day. And, but if I don't know she doesn't know, she even says, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't taken that step. So sometimes it's like people are just willing to watch people fall apart. It's like somebody's crossing the road and a big bus is coming and it's obvious they're going to get hit. Wouldn't you at least shout, say something? But it's indifference, So, devotee care starts with caring for devotees and on all levels. So he was that was the main topic of the discussion. And he was saying, so then Prabhupada, what if you came? And he was like, where's this one? Where's that one? Where is little Saraswati? Of course, when he said, where is little Saraswati, I was thinking, not so little anymore. It's like in her 40s. So anyway, she lives, she's married. She has 2 kids. One is a boy and a girl. And the boy is in college in Florida. She lives in a state called Illinois near Chicago. And the girl she just graduated. She had a virtual graduation from high school. She'll be going to college in California. And she's not a strict follower of Krishna consciousness. Her husband never was a devotee. And in fact, interestingly enough, he was like the type of person, what they call a meat and potatoes person, you know, like non-veg. And I could never see that this person would ever like, you know, change that habit, you know. But last year in November, I was talking to my daughter, and she said, oh, by the way, we've become vegans. And I almost fell off the chair. I was like, what, both of you? She goes, yes. So it wasn't for a, you know, what we might consider, the so-called himsa or other principles. It was basically based on health, but nonetheless, they embraced it. And I recently asked her, well, you sticking to this? And she goes, yes, we are. You know, so Krishna's mercy. She has no bad memories whatsoever about her time in Krishna consciousness. She was in the first Gurukul in Texas, and then was in the Gurukul in France. And by Krishna's mercy, she has no bad experiences, no bad scars. And when devotees interact with her, she's very, very, very social. One time Giriraj Maharaj found out she was living just very close to where he grew up. So he just called her up on the phone out of nowhere. And she was just very charming and speaking to him. And Radhanath Swami sometimes goes to her house to visit with her father when he's there. And she's always, again, very, you know, she speaks to him on a very friendly level. And so she has a good memory with good interactions with the devotees. Sometimes she's asked, well, what do you remember of Srila Prabhupada? And she's quite honest. She goes, you know, I was very little at those times. So what I do remember is Vrindavan, you know, so she's there. And the Bhakti Godhead magazine, in English anyway, is going to have a article on her by Satyaraj, and it's coming, I don't know, very soon, I guess, or, you know, in a month or 2, whatever. But in the interview with Satyaraj, she told him that when I get stressed for something, I chant Hare Krishna. So even I didn't know that, so that was nice to know. So that's just a little bit about her. Not so much, but a little bit. Her children, they're not what you can call aspiring spiritualists, at least at this point in time in their life. But there's one thing that I know from my personal experience, and it's documented, that whatever you do in Krishna's consciousness, whatever you do in spiritual life, it can never be diminished or lost. So even if you take what appears to be a break for some time, when the opportunity is there, immediately you'll start again from where you stepped off. So I have no doubt that my daughter and other children who don't appear to be on the front lines right now, in the future, whether in this life or most likely the next, they're going to be a strong part of the ISKCON movement. So, okay, question number 2. Are you ready for this one? What is your experience in U.S. with polygamy and devotee families? Are there good sides to it? Are any of Prabhupada disciples who have polygamy families who still practice Krishna consciousness? So, as it happens. I did know a devotee, a god sister, who was involved in a polygamous relationship. There were three of them. And I called her up and asked her to say a few, like to maybe, give me a few. I knew basically the general gist, but we talked a little bit about it. And just gonna get, here we go. What she, some of her feedback on that. So in general, of course, the first thing to understand is it's in most countries illegal, in most countries. And the countries where it's not illegal are not really usually very highly developed, spiritually developed countries. For example, when I was visiting Africa at one time, I met a person with several wives, and I don't know how happy they all were. But that was in Africa. And in most of the Western world, there's this polygamy is not really accepted. But still, in the Vedic culture, it was there. So how do we reconcile this? So Prabhupada initially was speaking about it frankly. Yes, it was acceptable in Vedic life, and there was good points when, especially if men outnumber the women, then the women aren't going to have a husband. So this can be a way of remedying that situation. Well, that's good if you can get along, if everybody can get along together. But my god sister was telling me that out of the three of them, there were two of them, they couldn't stand, the two wives, they couldn't stand each other, and they were always fighting like anything. And then they started reproducing and having children. And she was saying that at first she was feeling bad that she didn't, have children. But as things turned out, it was really Krishna's mercy on her. Thank you. It was Krishna's mercy on her that she never had children. And in all, it was mainly a very abusive relationship by a person who wasn't, not being able to control your senses is not really a particularly good reason for marriage. Because it means you don't control your mind either. And so it was a pretty abusive situation. And eventually she woke up and got out of it. And then one of the other two got out of it, and one of the wives is still with that person. But some practical considerations is the effect it would have on the children, and it was hellish. The children were very confused, disoriented. How do you explain your situation to people outside of the movement and even within the movement? Because it's basically not accepted. And we all know Prabhupada said that. So trying to do something that's contrary doesn't bode well. And again, in particular, Grihastha life means children. And children need to be cared for. They need to be nurtured. And if they're in a situation where that nurturing isn't going on, and they're witnessing and experiencing different types of abuse, psychological and physical, then what is going to be the effect on these children? And it's not going to be very healthy. So the children from that situation, all but two of them, and there was quite a few of them, I think there was like 5, 6, maybe 5 to 7, there was a lot of them. They don't want anything to do with this movement. One of the wives she doesn't even want to be, called her spiritual initiated, but she doesn't even want to hear that name. It didn't have a happy or Krishna conscious ending. So just something to think about. Now, I did meet a couple in another country, and it's in South America, and I don't know if it's allowed there or not, but these are devotees. And I saw this person at the temple with these two ladies. I didn't know if they were his wife and his sister-in-law or what, but then the devotees told me, no, it's two wives, and they've been married for a very long time, and they all seem very happy. So I guess it's a time, place, and circumstance, but in general, I would just say, don't even go that direction. It's going to be a huge distraction, and distraction means you're not going to have a peaceful life. And the whole point of marriage is to develop your Krishna in Krishna consciousness, is to develop your Krishna consciousness. And if you put yourself in a situation that is causing you such a distraction that Krishna consciousness is not being properly regulated or practiced, then what is the point of it? I'm going to skip the third question for now. Okay, number 4. This is quite, and we discussed this a bit in this talk. It says, we just got married and my husband's guru tells my husband not to have sex with me. I understand this, but now he doesn't even say nice words to me, nor does he hug me, avoids any physical contact with me. It's very difficult for me as I need to feel that I'm loved. What can I do in this situation? How should I explain this to my husband, not to seem what I am not? Now, this is an unfortunately common situation in many instances. And I personally feel that, of course, I don't know, it doesn't say the husband's guru is a sannyasi or not, but in general, sannyasis should avoid trying to tell married people what to do and how to do it. They should just stick to giving them good spiritual advice and letting them figure out what to do or not to do, or having them interact with successful married couples. But what she's expressing here is not the need for gross sense gratification, but the need for affection. He doesn't hug me. He doesn't, it's very difficult for me. I need to feel loved. Well, every spirit soul needs to feel loved. That is the nature. Loving affection is the nature of the spirit soul. And when that nature is shut down, how can one exist? You will exist, but not in a very happy state. So I will just, of course, she wants to know how to explain it to her husband. It depends, like if the husband is open to hearing. But Srila Prabhupada instructed one person, and I think I mentioned this at the time when I was speaking on these different points during the sessions, that Srila Prabhupada told one of his disciples, you have to show affection to your wife. And then he spelled it out. You should hug her. You should kiss her. You should give her a kiss. He's not saying some kind of Bollywood, Hollywood, mouth all over the body kiss. A kiss of endearment, a kiss of affection, a little kiss on the cheek. Give a hug, or, you're speaking, you pat the person's hand, or you pat them on the shoulder. Some form of endearment. This isn't Maya. Is it Maya to develop a relationship with your spouse, whether it's a man or because this could be turned around. It could be the wife is withholding affection from the husband. It doesn't have a healthy consequence. So affection doesn't mean gross sex. It just means that affection. Some kind words. Acknowledge, oh, very nice dinner. Thank you so much. You must have taken so much trouble, and it's, thank you so much. Or, oh, you look very nice today. Or some kind words, other than just quote some chapter and verse, but, some personal words and some personal affection. Now, this question, women are very emotional. I would say that's a blanket statement. Some women are very emotional, and they absorb all vibrations around them easily, both spiritual and negative. So her question is, how can I protect myself from these influences? What can I do practically? How can I control my emotional breakout fears? So my question, I would ask a question. I don't know who this person is, but are you she asked, what can I do practically? Are you chanting 16 rounds daily? Are you reading Srila Prabhupada's books daily? Attending a class, whether online or in person? And following the 4 rules and regulations? This is what you can do practically. If we're not doing these things, then we're going to be left wide open to be exploited by our own mind and senses. So these are the practical things we can do to control our she calls emotional breakouts or our fears. But, there's no time for like in-depth conversation here, so I'm just giving some short practical points that can be explored. So then this other question comes up a lot, actually. Where is the borderline between unnecessary association and neglecting fulfilling your duties to your family and relatives, even if the relatives are non-devotees? Actually, the borderline is this. Are you doing what you're doing for sense gratification, or are you doing it to fulfill your duty? Maybe the same thing, the same activity, but depending on the consciousness, So, first of all, it says the non-devotee relatives. Who knows when those non-devotee relatives may become great devotees simply because of your kindness to them. And they say, oh, this person, or you go to a family dinner and they're having, stuff you can't even bear to look at, but you don't say anything, you just bring some nice prasadam, but you don't eat their stuff either, you just, and you don't make an issue of it. Just be kind of, insert yourself politely, and people notice. They notice good behavior, believe it or not, sooner or later. There's so many stories, especially in Russia, that how whole families have taken to Krishna consciousness. It's something, between India and Russia, these two countries, the one member becomes a devotee and the next thing the whole family's following along. Not that they started out that way. And sometimes it takes a little while, like as in years. I was asking a devotee I had not seen for like almost 2 decades. Oh, because I remembered their family was so inimical, like heavy duty. So, how's your family doing? I didn't know what to expect. Oh, my mother is chanting 16 rounds. My father's initiated. My brother is reading Prabhupada's book. You don't know how it's going to come out. And if you behave in a way that turns them off, not that you compromise your principles, but there's ways of asserting good behavior in a way that doesn't offend other persons, that doesn't put them down, that honors them for being where they're at this moment, and allows the possibility that they can climb out of that situation, just like where we all, some of you may have been born in a devotee family, but for most of us, we weren't. So we didn't start out life with an advantage, apparently, but somehow or other we were able to change. And that change generally came about because somebody cared enough to be nice to us. I have one godbrother who was studying for his last exam in university. And he gets a phone call from another who became a godbrother, but he gets for his best friend. He goes, whatever you're doing right now, just put it down and get down here. So he was up in New York and the friend was in Cleveland, Ohio. Just put it down. I just met these incredible people. You've got to come and meet them. And he was so insistent that he put down his book, turned off the lamp, walked out his door, locked the door, and he had a motorcycle and went like 8 or 9 hours, 10 hours to get to Cleveland, Ohio. And he, 4:30 in the morning, when he gets there, he sees the address. There's some little bit of light on. He knocks on the door. This lady answers the door. Would you like to come in? Yeah, you know, and he sees it's a little dim inside and people are in a circle with their hands in a bag muttering something, you know. So she explains that they were chanting. It's like a form of meditation. Would you like to join us? And he thought, well, I just came, you know, all this way. Okay, you know. And so she taught him how to chant. And then the next thing was a class and he couldn't understand anything, but the person who spoke could understand. Here's a new fellow, and tried to adjust. And then it was prasadam, and everybody was just smiling at him and offering him nice prasadam. He didn't go back. He just stayed. He just stayed because everybody was just so kind. So kindness is a universal principle, and it doesn't have to compromise anything, you know. So if we can't do anything, at least be kind to each other and kind to those who come in the door. What to speak of being kind to our spouses. And what to speak of our non-devotee relatives. I remember, you know, it was like my first few months of being a devotee, and an aunt dies. So I wrote a letter of condolence to my uncle. And I told him, don't worry, she wasn't that body. When I look at it now, it was a pretty harsh thing to do. I mean, it could have been done, but after some gentle words, you know, first, but don't worry, she wasn't that body. Anyway, needless to say, he never became a devotee, but he did remain a good friend. We'll say that. And actually, when I got married, he was the only relative, him and his wife were the only relative who came to our wedding. Okay, so I'll skip one for a moment because it's just like the one about the Vedic wives and philosophy and what's my idea of a Vedic wife, and just skip that for now. An initiated devotee married to a beginner, and the beginning devotee has a bad habit. How should she deal with this bad habit? What's the better way to behave in the situation? Well, frankly, it really depends on what the bad habit is. If the bad habit is he beats his wife, I'd say there's the door, use it. But, okay, I mean, by bad habits, let's figure it's probably 1 out of the 4, you know? So, I mean, I spoke to my godbrother Sufas yesterday. He called me about, I'd called him, he called me back, and I thought, well, I had him on the phone, let me ask about his marriage, because I know he's been married a really long time. In fact, he's married, I found out, for 43 years. And so I was asking him about, you know, what did he think contributed to that marriage? And he said, commitment to Krishna consciousness. And this marriage was part of Krishna consciousness, so commitment to the marriage. But then he put the whole success of his marriage, he put it on his wife. He said that she was very intelligent and she knew how to use her intelligence. She was very devoted, and she always supported him. And whatever came up, she could just handle it very well. And therefore, he was always feeling that automatically he wanted, because of her mood, and he wanted to automatically care for her. It just came out, it wasn't something he had to do even artificially, but because she was exhibiting such a high degree of intelligence, utilizing her intelligence to very artfully manage the marriage and handle the challenges that would come up, that he automatically was in his words, I automatically wanted to care for her. So using the intelligence, we are given intelligence, so sometimes we have to use it. It can help in situations. And another thing he said, that she was always in tune with him, that she didn't try to like compete with him or didn't try to, push him aside. And she kept in tune with him. And the reward of this has been a long-lasting, very healthy marriage. And she's a very cultured person. She successfully runs a gift shop in Los Angeles, which is one of the best in America, or in this country even. So in most of the Western world, we don't have a lot of culture. Krishna consciousness involves culture. Slow down. Okay. So the question I passed up about the Vedic wife, blah, blah. From my point of view, we don't know really what a Vedic wife means in this day and age. But Vedic culture, we can learn about culture and we can practice being cultured. And within a marriage, there should be that mood of culture, and it comes from both sides. But yes, there's a lot of emphasis on the women. It's really up to us, and that's why Krishna gives us intelligence, to use that intelligence in dealing with those unruly beasts called husbands, how we deal with them. Prabhupada was telling one devotee, who had a husband who was not a devotee, was even trying to stop her and so many things. And he was giving her the idea that, you have to use your intelligence, he goes, just like, and he goes to the ear, just like the ear. We can't even see the ear unless there's a mirror, right? But you pull that ear and the whole head follows. So, in the same way, the wife has to use a little intelligence in dealing with the husband in order to, bring him around. And sometimes it may not work the way you expect. And sometimes it may happen depending on how bad a bad habit is. In other words, if there's abuse, there's certainly, if there's abuse and it doesn't stop, again, there's the door, use it. Prabhupada said, your body is not intended for someone else's sense gratification, like hitting or punching or overly sexualizing. But I would say the first time something happens, unless it's devastating, step back and figure out if you can use your intelligence to deal with the situation, but not leaving yourself at risk for abuse. There are some people within ISKCON who will say, well, you just have to tolerate it. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have to tolerate being abused by another person. But then at the same time, I would say, don't tack on the word abuse to every little thing that doesn't go your way. Abuse is abuse. It's harmful, it's negative, it's stifling, it's unhealthy. So just because something doesn't go your way doesn't always mean it's abuse. So about the beginner devotee, I would also say, give the person a chance. After all, you agreed to marry the person. You took some responsibility there, and try to see, again, not knowing what the bad habit is, how to deal with it in a way that will not shut the person down. In other words, don't nag at him, like, you this, you that, why are you doing this? You knew it before you got married. Figure out a way to turn it around, or to convince the person to turn it around. That would be the best way. And again, use of intelligence. Now here's one. I'm thinking, you have to ask this question. I have some serious concerns about your about your intelligence. Here's the question. Should I trust a devotee who married and divorced a few times? That's the point. Somebody's married, divorced, okay, once or twice, okay. A few times? saying it's just karma that gets burnt quickly with devotees. I mean, you would consider such a person? We hear the expression low self-esteem. I mean, to consider a person who is I would say, a serial predator in marriage, and you're wondering, like, should you trust that person? I mean, can you answer your own question there? But in case you can't, obviously not, you know. Now, here's one. This happens, and it's a difficult and even can be sad. Married couple, the wife wants a children, and it could be the other way around. The husband wants the children. So one of the two wants the children, and the other one doesn't. In this case, it said the husband wants her to serve him. How to navigate the situation? Well, obviously the husband doesn't understand that by having children, it's a wonderful way of serving the husband. You know, so having children is the basic function of Grihastha ashram, but how to deal with that. Certainly, this is a case for premarital consultation. That before getting married, did you not discuss this point? And sometimes when there's a heavy attraction, you'll say yes to anything just to get that person, right? You don't want kids? Oh, I don't want them either. You know, think a lot before you get married, and ask questions and get good answers and be honest, you know, because you're going to have to live with that decision. That being said, I have seen cases where 11 years went by of one or the other refusing, and then they did change, and now they have a very nice child, and both of them are very happy. So it can happen. But that is something that should really be thoroughly discussed prior to the marriage. And if you agree, no, I don't want children, but then later but you don't really, you're just saying it to like facilitate getting married, that's not a very good thing. It's, you know. How to fight feelings that stand in the way of a proper grihastha life. So feelings such as, it's not clear what kind of feelings they're talking about. I mean, could be anything. Maybe the husband finds himself, or the wife, they get attracted to somebody else. How do you deal with that? That would stand in the way of proper grihastha life, or maybe not, depending on how you deal with it. I think one needs to process carefully what feelings are considering, and is this a valid thing? I mean, just the word feelings can be so many things. Feeling angry, feeling depressed, feeling what, feeling, as I mentioned already, attracted to somebody else, feeling you want more than you're getting out of the current relationship. So the feelings need to be defined very clearly. And it says fight the feelings. Really, fighting doesn't usually help anything, but you could say trying to redetermine, remold those feelings, trying to moderate feelings that you find stand in the way of a proper grihastha life. But it depends, again, what we're talking about. Now, this is a good question. How to help and give psychological support to children in divorced families. And that could be a huge topic of discussion, because certainly when there's divorce and children are involved, the most vulnerable persons are the children. So I can't get into a lengthy dissertation here, but I would say if divorce is inevitable and it occurs and there's children, do whatever you can to maintain a good relationship with the former spouse so that the children don't feel neglected or uncared for, or they don't feel like they're being used as a pawn between the two. Like, here's what happens sometimes. Either the wife or the husband, they'll put down the other spouse. Oh, your mother, oh, your father. This is horrible for the children. Even let's say the father's a total scoundrel. It's their father and they love him. Just that simple. You know. Or the father is, oh, your mother this, your mother that. Now, what does that tell you, the kid? It tells you that it's okay to trash the mom, you know. It needs to be really a big effort, more than anything else, into maintaining a good relationship after divorce. And by that, it's just, if nothing else, be civil to one another. Be polite. And above all, don't trash talk the other spouse. And then if there's a case where, let's say there's remarriage and then there's the other person brings in more kids, there's another dynamic, you know, between the kids of one and the kids of the other. Many challenges are there in that case, and I'm sure that there's a lot of information on family counseling that talks about these dynamics in psychological dynamics and supporting children of divorced families. So I would say, you know, speak to other devotees who may have gone through this and have successfully navigated, or take information from the psychology's point of view, because we're mainly concerned with just, you know, we want our children hopefully to be Krishna conscious, but they're not going to be Krishna conscious if they feel psychologically damaged. They're just wanting get away from the situation. So take help from wherever you can get it, so that your children aren't marginalized or feel unwanted or neglected. So, why did Kardama Muni perform austerities and then ask for a wife? Okay, so first of all, you can read in the third canto of the Bhagavatam, chapter 22, wonderful chapter, the marriage of Kardama Muni and Devahuti. It's a beautiful chapter, and it shows all different aspects of coming together for the purpose of marriage. So Kardama Muni was an ascetic, and an important fact for him is that he never took Nashtika brahmachari vows. He was just an ascetic. He was brahmachari because he wasn't married, but he didn't take the vow of Nashtika brahmachari. So that vow is practically like becoming a sannyas. It means absolutely will never get married or have sex life. So he didn't take that vow. And there was one story about how he was prompted by either Vishnu or Brahma that he should get married and have a child. And the reason for this was because it was understood that he would have an extraordinary child, which he did. His marriage to Devahuti was done on the highest level. Devahuti was a young girl, a virgin girl, and from her spiritual master, Narada Muni, she heard about Kardama Muni. Simply by hearing about him, her heart became fixed upon him. Now, she didn't try to find out where he lived and dress up really fancy and put a lot of tinkle bells on her ankles and go looking, oh, great sage. She didn't do that, you know. Very chaste girl, but her heart was fixed. And she told her father, Swayambhuva Manu. And Swayambhuva Manu, being a very high-level devotee himself, he humbly approached Kardama Muni. And he introduced his daughter in such a way that Kardama Muni could understand her level of chastity and her high level of good qualities. And since he was open to marriage, he could understand that this young girl, Devahuti, was a suitable candidate. And it explains throughout the chapter what the good qualities that are required and what the good qualities that she had as in terms of being a wife. And considering her background, if you're a princess, you're not sleeping on the floor generally. You're dressed very well. That you're eating very opulently. But when she became the wife of Kardama Muni, instead of dragging her lifestyle into the house, she perfectly adapted to his renunciate type of life. To the degree that she was, it's described that she became very skinny and her hair was probably had dreadlocks, But then Kardama Muni, he saw, look what she was doing for him. And then he created this wonderful, wonderful situation. And so then they enjoyed together for some time. An opulent life, her beauty was restored. And, they had a very nice life for some time. And then on the appropriate time, they had a son. That was Kapila. And the understanding going into this marriage was that once she had the son, he would then leave her with the son who would be qualified to guide her and teach her and protect her, and he would then go back to his ascetic life. So two very extraordinary persons, and it was all part of course, a greater overview plan by Lord Krishna to bring Kapila into this world. And his instructions to Devahuti are impeccable. So, especially in terms of spiritual life, that's where, they weren't discussing household problems, but, because she had been trained early on, because she had in her family as a daughter of a king, she'd been trained properly, and then as the wife of Kardama Muni, she could perfectly understand what is the meaning of human form of life. She gets a son who can guide her in that way, and it wasn't like he fell down by asking for a wife. It was preordained, you can say. And I've heard from many, many godbrothers who went through brahmachari before they got married that practically all of them have said if it wasn't for that time as brahmachari, when they got married, they would have completely become bewildered, But because of having that brahmachari experience, they could always keep in mind the purpose and goal of life, even if they had to deal with the grihastra ashram of life, wife, children, house, etc. Next question, should devotees get married if they're not going to have children? Example, maybe due to old age or health. So, of course, it depends on the persons involved. It depends on the situation. But in general, I could say, well, why not? I mean, because I have seen within ISKCON very good examples of in a late age marriage. It means they're not going to have children. But by this companionship, which is what it is, it's not for sense gratification, they're fully 100% engaged in Krishna's service within ISKCON, serving the movement, serving each other to serve the movement. Good examples. And it depends on the motive, So everything in life is like that, But if you just simply, I've heard people, I want to get married because I want somebody to take care of me, like they're older, and they want somebody to take care of them in their much older age. Well, who's to guarantee that's going to work out like that? You know, one god sister, husband they've been married long term, massive stroke, totally incapacitated, totally. So you're thinking, oh, he'll take care of me, or he's thinking she'll take care of me, but who knows what's going to happen to them. So this marriage business has to be taken with full consideration that the pendulum can swing either direction. And the commitment that's taken, the vows to serve each other, should not be taken cheaply. I know one god sister, this was when they were much younger, she was married, she had a husband who had a stroke. He wasn't fully incapacitated, but compromised. But she left him. She just left him. And she took another lady's husband. You know, what kind of a mess was that? Actually, it was good for the husband who had the stroke, because then the true colors of that wife was known. And to this day, in spite of having a stroke and limited capacity, he's a very good devotee, 100% serving within the movement. And the wife who got ditched is also 100% serving on very high levels in the movement. So there can be reasons for late marriage, but don't make a condition to get married thinking, oh, you'll be taken care of, because it may be you who's going to be called upon to be the caretaker. Yeah. The best reason is to come together in Krishna service. There's another one I wanted to go back to. Oh, the question was, what did Prabhupada say about the duties of a wife and husband to each other? So probably that would take a week to discuss, but I would say these kind of questions like that, you can look it up in the database. You can look at, read the Bhagavatam, look, these questions are spelled out. There's answers to these questions that are spelled out in the teachings. Now for the how-tos, because maybe sometimes, okay, I get it, but how to do it? Then we have like the Grasser Vision team. They've got experienced devotees who can help you. Or you go to a successfully married couple and inquire from them. In general, I don't recommend going to sannyasis because unless they had a successful marriage and then their sannyas was a natural transition, otherwise they don't really understand the nuances that are necessary for giving good marital counseling. So that's what I have seen from experience, and I stand by those words. Of course, they can say the right things, but again, the how to do it, and they don't have that experience. So I'm going to wind up with just one point. There is one couple, and they're a long-term married couple. And at one point when they were first married, they realized that this marriage business is very difficult. Like before you're married and you're just seeing and you're talking and it's all very nice. And then you get together in the same room, the door's closed and it's just you and them, and ooh, different story. How are they going to deal with that? So they decided that they would deal with it through reading Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Now, it takes a really strongly committed couple to do this. Strong commitment to Krishna consciousness, no matter what, and strong commitment to the marriage. But that's what they have done for almost 40 years. They sit, let's say there's an argument. Well, they'll put it on hold until the end of the day when they can sit down and talk together with cool heads, and let's see what the Bhagavatam says. Let's see what the Gita says about this, how we should deal with it. And they've been able to navigate a successful marriage in that way. I'm sure not everybody can do this, but I'd like to put it on the table because I've seen this couple can do it, and they're very productive on the Krishna conscious level. It's not just some words, it's in action. So again, it's based on commitment. Commitment to make this marriage work no matter what, except again in abuse, just I have to say that because there's a tendency for some people who are a little fanatical to think abuse should be tolerated, and physical abuse or overly sexual abuse, and that's just not part of the program. Otherwise, most things can be worked out and should be worked out. And one should be willing to work things out, even if they're awkward or difficult, because the result of working things out is actually you come to a high level of real affection, of real love within the marriage. And most of all, your partner, whether it's a husband or the wife, are your best friends. And that's something you should really see as a very high level of achievement. I remember one time I suggested, this girl came to me and she was saying she wanted to get married, and I suggested somebody. I just said, well, what do you think about this person? Oh, no, we're just friends. I said, well, wouldn't you want to be friends with your husband? Oh, no, we're just friends. A few weeks later, she comes to me and she goes, you know what? I've been thinking about what you said. So, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. So then I had to play it kind of cool. Okay, well, let me see what he thinks. Well, Krishna has a sense of humor. In the same day, I get a phone call from that person. And this person, when he would get into something awkward and difficult to talk about, he'd start to stutter. So if he started to stutter, I could tell this was going to be something, So, but I want to talk to you about something. And I said, yeah, what's that? Well, I'm thinking about my marriage. I said, oh, that's great. He goes, but I have somebody in mind. Oh, good. Who? Turns out it was that girl who So I didn't tell him. I said, okay, well, let me talk to her and see what she has to say. Anyway, 19 years down the road, they're still married. So, and they're best friends. Okay, Hare Krishna. Any one of these topics could be the full conversation in themselves. And I encourage people to look in Prabhupada's books to find out what he says and then try to understand it. Don't take it in such a black and white level. There's nuances, and learn how to apply practically in a healthy way the instructions that you read.